Every empire in history believed it was permanent. The Romans didn't think Rome would fall. The British didn't think the sun would set on their empire. The Dutch, at the height of their global dominance in the 1600s, couldn't imagine a world where Amsterdam wasn't the financial capital of civilization. They were all wrong. And here's the thing that should stop you cold. Every single one of those empires, from the Assyrians in 859 BC to the Soviet Union in 1991, collapsed following the exact same pattern. 6 stages, over and over again, across 3,000 years of human history, through different cultures, different religions, different geographies, different technologies. The pattern doesn't care about any of that. General Sir John Glubb, a British Army officer and historian who spent decades studying empires, analyzed 11 civilizations across 3 millennia. His conclusion? The average lifespan of an empire is roughly 250 years, 10 generations, and every one of them moved through the same 6 stages on the way down. Ray Dalio, founder of the world's largest hedge fund, spent years mapping these same cycles and reached the same terrifying conclusion. The collapse isn't random, it's structural, it's predictable, and the warning signs are visible long before the final fall. This is the Wealth Records. Every video will change how you see money, history, and the systems controlling your life. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because what you're about to learn isn't ancient history. It's a mirror held up to the present moment. Let's go through all 6 stages. And at the end, we're going to talk about exactly where the United States sits on this timeline today, because the answer might be more uncomfortable than you expect. Stage 1, the Age of Conquest. Every empire begins not with wealth, but with hunger, not metaphorical hunger, actual hunger, scarcity, desperation. A group of people, poor, battle-hardened, with nothing to lose, explodes outward with a ferocity that shocks the world. The early Arabs in the 7th century were desert tribes living on the margins of civilization. Within 100 years, they had built an empire stretching from Spain to Central Asia. The Mongols were nomadic horsemen from the steppes, and then, almost overnight, they controlled the largest contiguous land empire in human history. The Romans started as a small city-state on the Tiber, surrounded by enemies, and responded by absorbing every one of them. What makes Stage 1 so powerful isn't military technology or superior numbers. It's character. The pioneers of Stage 1 are unified by a shared cause. They are disciplined where their enemies are complacent. They are hungry where their enemies are comfortable. They innovate where their enemies are rigid. Glubb called these people poor, hardy, often ill-clad. But they abound in courage, energy, and initiative. That combination, unified purpose plus raw hunger, is almost impossible to defeat. The American founding generation fits this mold exactly. Colonists who couldn't afford the luxury of losing, fighting against the most powerful military empire on earth, sustained by a cause they believed in absolutely. They won, against all rational odds, because Stage 1 empires almost always win. But here is what history teaches us: the Stage 1 empires never understand. The very qualities that build the empire are destroyed by the empire's success. The hunger disappears when the food arrives. The discipline evaporates when discipline is no longer required for survival. The unity fractures when there is enough wealth to fight over. Every empire is destroyed, at least in part, by what it creates. At Stage 2, the Age of Khmer. The conquest is over. Now comes the building. Stage 2 is the era of merchants, traders, and administrators. Military victories have secured territory and resources. Now the empire must organize itself. It builds roads, navies, and legal codes. It establishes trade routes, banking systems, and diplomatic relationships. It creates the infrastructure of prosperity. This is the era of the Dutch East India Company, of the Roman road network that stretched from Scotland to Mesopotamia, of the British Navy that made the oceans safe for British commerce, and only British commerce. The wealth that flows in during Stage 2 is extraordinary, and it is real. It is backed by genuine productivity. New trade routes opened, new industries created, new territories integrated. The empire is growing faster than it is spending. Its finances are healthy. Its currency is strong and trusted. The institutions built in Stage 2 become the foundation of global power. The Roman legal system shaped Western law for 2 millennia. British contract law and financial institutions still undergird global commerce today. American innovation in finance, from the stock market to the dollar as the world's reserve currency, gave the U.S. an economic dominance that outlasted its military adventures. But Stage 2 plants a dangerous seed, the belief that prosperity is the natural order, that growth is automatic, that the system will always produce more than it consumes. That belief is the most expensive mistake an empire can make. Stage 3, the age of affluence. At the peak of the cycle, the empire doesn't look like it's in any danger at all. Its cities are the most beautiful in the world. Its art and architecture represent the pinnacle of human achievement. Its universities are training the finest minds on the planet. Its military is unmatched. Its currency is the default language of global trade, and its people enjoy a standard of living that previous generations couldn't have imagined. Rome in the 2nd century AD, the British Empire in 1870, the United States in 1955. These are the moments that get written into history as the gold standard of civilization. And they are real. The wealth is real. The power is real. The cultural achievement is genuine. But inside the affluence, the rot is already beginning. Ray Dalio's framework identifies this precisely. The same wealth that signals the peak of the empire is also what begins its undoing. The hard-working generation that built the wealth raises children who inherit the wealth. Those children raise grandchildren who expect the wealth. And at each generational step, the memory of what it cost to build fades a little more. Dalio writes about this pattern across every major empire he studied: the Dutch in the 1700s, the British in the early 1900s, and the Americans today. The reserve currency, the ultimate symbol of peak empire power, becomes a curse. Because when you can borrow from the entire world at favorable rates, you will, and you won't stop until you can't. Stage 3 is when the seeds of destruction are planted, watered, and carefully nurtured. In the language of finance, this is when the debt cycle begins to turn. Stage F forward, the age of intellect, and forgetting this stage is subtle, and it may be the most dangerous one of all. As affluence becomes normalized, the empire's smartest people turn their energy from building to questioning. Universities multiply. Philosophy flourishes. The great debates of the age are no longer how do we survive or how do we expand. They are abstract arguments about the nature of governance, the meaning of citizenship, the rights of individuals. None of this is inherently bad. Some of the greatest achievements in human thought come from this phase. Athenian philosophy, the Enlightenment, the golden age of American academia in the mid-20th century. But something quietly breaks in stage 4. The intellectual class becomes detached from the physical reality that sustains the empire. They critique the system without understanding what holds it together. They assume the prosperity that funds their scholarship will simply always be there. They become, as Glubb observed, convinced that cleverness alone can solve structural problems without sacrifice, without discipline, without the collective commitment that built the empire in the first place. Meanwhile, a deeper cultural shift is happening. The heroes of stage 1 were generals, founders, explorers, people who built something at great personal cost. The heroes of stage 4 are entertainers, athletes, and celebrities. The gladiator replaces the general. The influencer replaces the innovator. The culture becomes spectacular, brilliant on the surface, hollow underneath. This isn't moralizing. It's a diagnostic pattern that is repeated across every empire Glubb and Dalio studied, and it is the clearest early warning of what comes next. Stage F5, the age of decadence. The 4 horizon stage 5 is where the collapse becomes structural, where it stops being reversible. 4 forces converge in stage 5, and they feed on each other in a loop that no amount of good intentions can break. The first horseman, debt. The empire's government has been spending more than it earns for decades, subsidizing the loyalty of its population, funding wars, maintaining a military presence everywhere on Earth. It has borrowed against the future so many times that the interest payments alone consume a staggering share of the national budget. Rome debased its silver coins, mixing in base metals to create more currency from less silver, and destroyed the trust that had sustained its economy. Britain borrowed so heavily to fight 2 world wars that it emerged victorious and bankrupt. The U.S. federal debt currently exceeds $36 trillion, with annual interest payments approaching $1 trillion. That's more than the entire defense budget. Just interest. Just the cost of old promises. The second horseman, inequality. In stage 5, wealth concentrates with breathtaking speed. The institutions that once produced broad prosperity, strong labor markets, regulated finance, accessible education, become captured by the wealthy and redirected to serve the wealthy. The middle class, the backbone of every successful empire, begins to hollow out. And when enough people feel excluded from the prosperity they were promised, they stop believing in the system. They stop investing in it. They start burning it down or looking for someone who promises to burn it down for them. The third horseman, political paralysis. The political system that once made rapid decisions, that could reorganize the economy in wartime, that could build interstate highways and space programs, calcifies. Every reform is blocked by the faction that profits from the status quo. Every hard choice is deferred to the next election cycle. Glubb observed that declining empires are characterized by politicians who buy votes with government spending even as the treasury empties. Sound familiar? The fourth horseman, the external challenger. Stage 5 never happens in isolation. While the old empire consumes itself with internal dysfunction, a hungrier power rises on the outside. It is disciplined where the old empire is decadent. It is unified where the old empire is fractured. It is in stage 1 while the old empire is in stage 5. The Dutch faced the British faced the Americans. The Americans are now watching China do what America did to Britain a century ago, not challenge it militarily, but outcompete it economically, technologically, and diplomatically, until the old empire's global influence quietly recedes. These four forces don't cause each other, they amplify each other. Debt leads to austerity, which increases inequality, which fuels political chaos, which prevents debt reform, which increases debt. The loop tightens until something breaks. Stage SIX, the collapse C. Fast or slow. Here is what most people get wrong about imperial collapse. It is rarely a single dramatic moment. The Western Roman Empire didn't fall on a Tuesday. It degraded over roughly 200 years, losing territory piece by piece, cycling through corrupt and incompetent emperors, watching its currency lose value, seeing its best soldiers replaced by mercenaries who had no loyalty to Rome and every reason to take what they could. The British Empire didn't collapse in a day. It bled out slowly through 2 world wars, gave away its empire in piecemeal colonial withdrawals between 1945 and 1970, and watched the center of global finance quietly move from London to New York, a shift so gradual that finances quietly moved from London to New York, a shift so gradual that by the time it was obvious, it was already over. The Soviet Union felt permanent right up until it wasn't. In 1985, almost no analyst predicted it would be gone in 6 years. Then the internal contradictions, the debt, the failed economy, the political corruption, the lost ideological faith, reached a critical mass, and the whole thing unwound in 3 years with almost no violence. Stage 6 can be slow or fast, but it is always the same thing. The gap between what the empire promises its people and what it can actually deliver becomes impossible to paper over. The currency fails, or the debt becomes unpayable, or the military overextension breaks the treasury, or the internal political conflict becomes irresolvable, or, most commonly, all 4 at once. And then after the dust settles, a new power is risen. A new stage 1 is begun somewhere else. The cycle resets. This is the question you've been waiting for. The United States is 249 years old in 2025, right at the average lifespan of an empire. That alone should give you pause. The debt is real, $36 trillion and climbing, with no credible political path to reversing the trajectory. The inequality is real. The top 1% of Americans now hold more wealth than the entire middle class combined. The political paralysis is real, a system so gridlocked that it cannot pass a budget without a crisis, let alone reform its pension liabilities or its healthcare costs. The external challenger is real. China has spent 30 years methodically building the economic, technological, and diplomatic infrastructure to offer the world an alternative to American-led order. But here is the part that most people miss. The United States is not Rome on the eve of the barbarian sack of 410 AD. Not yet. It still has extraordinary advantages. The deepest capital markets in the world, the most powerful military, the dollar as the world's reserve currency, a culture of innovation that still produces more Nobel laureates and technology breakthroughs than any other country. The question isn't whether America is falling. The question is whether it's in stage 4 or stage 5, whether the collapse is still decades away or whether we are already watching it happen in slow motion. History doesn't give us a countdown clock. It gives us patterns. Here's what the patterns say. Every empire that found itself in stage 5 and escaped did so through a genuine, painful, structural transformation. Not speeches, not debt-ceiling theater, not printing money and calling it prosperity, actual reform, the kind that requires sacrifice from people who have the political power to prevent sacrifice from ever reaching them. That kind of reform is possible. Britain lost its empire but kept its institutions. It rebuilt. South Korea was one of the poorest countries on earth in 1960 and became a high-tech powerhouse within 2 generations. Empires can transform. The cycle isn't inevitable. But transformation requires something stage 5 empires are in very short supply of: the willingness to be honest about the diagnosis before the patient is already in the ICU. The 6 stages are not fate. They are a warning. The question is whether anyone in power is listening. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.